Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. So if you've been tuning into the show over these last few days, you're probably recognizing a bit of a theme, which is around how we as men can become better leaders, more trustworthy leaders, stronger advocates and champions of women in the workplace. Now, many men still operate in environments that are heavily male-dominated. I know that I did for 15 years, working in financial services, and it's incumbent upon male leaders to recognize, to deepen our consciousness around some of the disadvantages that women face swimming upstream, working in a masculine environment where many of the opportunities aren't always on a level playing field. And that's why it's on us as great men, as great leaders, to recognize where we can help balance out the opportunities and create environments where everybody can thrive. Now, I had the opportunity to interview and shine a light on 14 very successful women who had built careers in male-dominated businesses and had risen to the ranks at the top of the field in the variety of fields that they operated in, many of them inside the financial services and insurance and law arenas. And I wanted to share with you 5 things that I learned from these successful women about grit. Now, grit's a word that's been around for ages, but it took on a whole new meaning and level of importance when Angela Duckworth decided to write the New York Times bestselling book called Grit. Now, Angela Duckworth is a University of Pennsylvania professor, and the way that she defines grit is passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. Grit is passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. So I'd like to share with you the 5 lessons that I learned from this group of successful women about grit. Number 1, resiliency is an invaluable skill when playing the long game. Resiliency is an invaluable skill when playing the long game. So these women have built 20, 30, 40-year careers in male-dominated environments where they regularly found themselves as the only woman seated at the table, or one of few, where the rules are different at happy hours, and conferences. Guys drinking past midnight and being like, a group of guys, that's normal, it's fun. But the woman who stays out after midnight and she's the only woman, there's reputational risk and things that she has to consider, being hit on by guys. Like that stuff can be exhausting. Many of these women had built successful careers, are literally at the tops of their professions. I'm talking about top 100 salespeople in the entire industry. One of the women that we interviewed was one of the top 10 wealth advisors in the state of Arizona as ranked by Forbes. So we're talking about the best of the best. They figured out how to succeed. But at the end of the day, when the workday was over and they got in the elevator by themselves, their shoulders would slump. They would let out a big breath of air and just be fucking exhausted. Because it's not easy always playing an away game and swimming upstream. They figured out a way to be successful doing it, but it took a lot out of them. And so this conversation about how to build resiliency through self-care, through environmental factors, through self-awareness, through making sure that their tank was refilled, became not just a nice to have, but it became essential. So resiliency is an invaluable skill. And there's an episode that we did with Jenny Evans, who is a world-renowned keynote speaker, a dear friend of mine. I have monthly phone calls with her. I have got one tomorrow I'm very much looking forward to. There's an entire episode on resiliency with Jenny Evans. So you can go check that out at doinnerwork.com/resources, and you'll see the Design Your Future podcast series. The second thing that I learned from successful women about grit is knowing when to put the armor down. Knowing when to put the armor down. Linda Knox was one of my mentors in my 15-year career working at Prudential Retirement, and universally one of the most well-respected leaders in any walk of life that I've ever been a part of. Linda was one of the people. She was the person who helped me to co-facilitate the women's retreat that I ran in New York City last year for 3 days, 7 very successful women who came together to design the next decade of their lives. And Linda, when we were working together at Prudential Retirement, was in charge of massive responsibility for the learning and development organization. And she created the entire learning and development organization at Prudential Retirement, which is still a crown jewel of the business. She was also responsible for all of our industry and conferences. And by the way, like at Prudential Retirement, we were the #1 most sought after industry and conferences to come to because of her efforts. And she was also a single mother responsible for raising 2 teenage boys. And when she would come home from a day at the office, she was aware enough that she was still in business Linda mode, not mom mode. She was in business Linda mode, like having, organized, made decisions, calling shots, shuffling decks. And when she came home, she was aware enough to recognize that that's not the same energy to bring as a parent. So she would walk through the door and tell her sons, I got to go upstairs, clean up, like change over. She would literally have a ritual of going up to her bedroom, changing out of her work stuff, putting on her clothes that were like mom clothes or comfortable clothes, whatever she put on, and take like 5 or 10 minutes for herself to clean off the day so that when she came back downstairs, she was not business Linda, she was mom. And that was essential for her to maintaining a deep and loving and trusting relationship with her 2 sons where, they come to her for everything. And like she's told me some stories about some of the experiences that they've shared. And it's just like she has truly built a loving and trustworthy relationship with the 2 of her sons. So she knew when to take the armor off, even though grit requires a hell of a lot of armor. Number 3, grit and only grit can be reckless. Living from grit and only grit and a life of grit can be reckless. Reckless to your health, reckless to your long-term ability to enjoy life, reckless to your health. Terry Kelly, who is one of my dear friends and is like a model client. She's done all of the inner work that we've done together. I mean, she's just like embraced it and soaked it up like a sponge. The reason why Terry Kelly came to me last year was because this superwoman, right? She's the top 10 wealth advisor for women wealth advisors in the state of Arizona as ranked by Forbes. She's one of the top Morgan Stanley senior VP producers, devoted, loving wife, and a mother of 2 young boys, and a 5-time Ironman competitor. She came to me last year because she had a massive panic attack that she thought was a heart attack, where 6 paramedics raced to her home, took her out of the house on a gurney and a stretcher and brought her, to the hospital because she had overworked herself. If there's anybody who's the definition of grit, it's Terry Kelly. And she recognized that had gone too far out of balance. There was no room, no space left in her life for actually just like listening to music, for spending time with her friends, for taking adventures, for refilling her tank. Like one of the best stories that just encapsulates who she was that led her to that moment in the back of the ambulance was if she would drive up to a stoplight and it was red for more than 10 seconds, she better get like 2 emails responded to, or some piece of work done. Otherwise, she felt like there was 30 seconds of wasted productivity time. She was no longer determined. She was just in a state of compulsion. And I talked about that the other day, which was, don't mistake compulsion for drive. That was actually spurred on by a conversation Terry and I had. Compulsion is not the same as drive. Drive is intentional. Compulsion, you're just being driven around, like you're being puppeted around by fear. And Terry recognized that that's how she was living a big part of her life. So was I. Until we interrupted that pattern. Grit and only grit can be reckless until you can hit a state of burnout. So we did an entire episode with Terry called Beating Burnout and Taking Back Life on Your Terms. That's also in the Design Your Future series at doinnerwork.com on the resources tab. Number 4, one of the number 4 thing I learned about from successful women about grit is that we are stronger together. We are stronger together. We have seen a proliferation of women's groups, women's organizations over the last decade. I remember a decade ago when like women in pensions or women in retirement service, women in finances like started to pop up. And there were a lot of guys who rolled their eyes at that. It's like, what is this women only group? Guys would make off-color jokes about what was happening. Well, it turns out that too many women had been fighting for equal opportunities, fighting for raising awareness of issues, to bring together like a strong voice and a unity. Well, when they started forming these women's groups, interest groups, strengthening groups, their voices were heard. Progress was being made. Areas that had been ignored for many years all of a sudden got a seat at the table. They have strong influence, and now guys are paying attention to that, right? So now inside of the retirement services industry where I spent 15 years, these groups like Women in Pensions and others have a fucking strong voice and wield a lot of authority around how the future of the industry is being built. Hiring practices for women, making sure that women get an equal seat, an equal shot at larger scale opportunities. And so they have taught me that going at things alone is a really exhausting game where you're swimming a bit, a bit upstream, but stronger together. And that's why, guys, I'm so passionate about the mastermind, right? The Great Man Mastermind, where we have this group of 20 men. And that is just but a first step in the process of what I plan on bringing to you in the future of how we can do much more inner work together. Some in intense settings like the mastermind, which is a 12-month commitment and a heavy financial investment. And others we're going to be doing online challenges, exercises, communities where we can start to do more inner work together because we are stronger together. And the fifth and final thing that these successful women have taught me about grit, and this was not something they taught me directly, but is something that they taught me indirectly, is that we can do a better job rewarding and recognizing grit when we see it. If you remember the definition that Angela Duckworth outlined for grit, which is passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. And that last piece about no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. What I had a chance to see was that too many of these women dramatically underestimated their value and their impact on those around them. They had been dramatically shortchanged the reward and recognition that they deserved for a career well lived, a very inspiring, very powerful career. And oftentimes they didn't get the kind of reward or recognition. In many cases, they had to shrink their own success for partners, masculine male partners who would feel intimidated by their success and oftentimes had to water that down as a result. And many of these women also felt quite uncomfortable receiving praise and recognition because it had been something that was so foreign to them, or when they did want to appreciate or receive praise or recognition, it was made to feel indulgent. And so, gentlemen, this is an opportunity to shower praise and recognition when we see examples of grit, when we see unbelievable performance, right? Like when we see something that's worth praising. And I'm gonna up the ante even a step further to deliver that recognition and praise in a way where she can hear it. Not in the way that you would want to receive it, but in the way that she would want to receive it. That's a very different thing, right? We oftentimes give praise and recognition the way that we would want it done, not necessarily in the way that they would want it done. And some of the women in this podcast series who I interviewed have a very hard time receiving praise and recognition. So I had to go in and find the specific ways that they could hear me. And one of those ways, I can think of one person in particular. I'm not going to call her out because I don't have necessarily her permission to tell this story with her name attached to it. But I had to let her know that by not sharing this podcast that we did with her, that it was actually something selfish, that she would be withholding her own brilliance and genius by not sharing her gift with the world because she was feeling squeamish about sharing her podcast episode, thinking that it would be self-promotional. when in actuality, the opposite is true. She is a wealth of knowledge and a source of inspiration for so many. People are craving to hear her story, and it would be selfish for her not to share it. And that is like giving her that lens, helping her to understand that is a source of recognition and praise that she can hear on a deeper level than "you're amazing, you're awesome, you do such inspiring work." Those words seem to roll off of her, right? But coming at it from a different angle is something that's opened her up. So that fifth and final way, gentlemen, is that we can do a better job rewarding and recognizing. So let me summarize those 5 things that successful women taught me about grit. Number 1, resiliency is an invaluable skill to building longevity and playing the long game. Number 2, knowing when to put down the armor, when to be in business mode and then when to be father or boyfriend or husband or friend. Number 3, grit and only grit can be reckless. Living only relentlessly from a place of intensity can lead to burnout and self-harm and just like sucking the joy out of life over a long period of time. Number 4, we are stronger together than we are on our own. And you hear Brian and I talking about personal development on your own is slow, shallow, and incomplete. That's why we got to do it together, guys. And number 5, we as men can do a better job rewarding and recognizing grit in women when we see it. All right, one last time, you can head over to doinnerwork.com/resources or doinnerwork.com and then click on the resources tab. You will get access to the Design Your Future podcast series, which is a series of 14 interviews with very successful women in male-dominated businesses. And gentlemen, I highly encourage you to check that out because as leaders, as men, as great men, we are constantly looking for ways to create environments where we and those we care about can thrive. And if you as a man are willing to do the homework to understand what it's like to build a career in a male-dominated business, that is only fortifying your inner foundation where you can become a trustworthy, deeper, more conscious, masculine leader.